Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys an update on my various bamboo plants. So two of these bamboo plants have had several regular updates. They're my two Moso bamboos. I'll put a link in the description for the series I've done on them, but basically I grew them from seed almost a year ago, probably about 10 months ago, and they're the two on at the back here. So we've got one here which was actually the smallest originally, but is now by far the biggest, and we've got this one here which has been struggling a little bit, and I'll go into a bit more detail about how these two have differed over the lifespan. So they're only 10 months old. My other bamboo is the one at the back, which is a Phyllostachys aureosulcata, and the variety is Spectabilis. That one's another large bamboo. And then at the bottom I've got a couple of unknown bamboos. I think they're Fargesias. Basically I grew them from seed about 5 years ago. They've been very slow growing and they're just starting to get to a decent size now. They're actually sown at the same time, but they're showing very different characteristics. So what I'll do now is I'll go through each type of bamboo individually and tell you how it's been doing. So first of all I'll talk about this bamboo. This is my Phyllostachys aureosulcata Spectabilis. This variety of bamboo should get quite large eventually. In my climate, probably up to 5 or 6 meters. It can get taller in its native habitat though. But what I find so interesting about this bamboo is how much it's grown since I've had it. So I got this around March time, I think it was. It came in the post, quite a small plant. And in fact, all it had was one single stem, which is this one here. You can see how small that is, just a single small stem. And when I come back, I'll show you how much it has grown. Basically put up two shoots. One on the right is this one here, which is the smaller of the two. The one on the left is really quite big and it's now about 6 foot tall. So put on a huge amount of growth. It's still greening up. These leaves are still growing. They'll continue to green up until autumn. So as you can see through it quite nicely at the moment. This will get a bit leafier as time goes on, and it should get a bit more of a screen effect. I'll be able to use this at the back of the garden as a screen. Now that it's coming to the end of summer, it's actually starting to put a lot of growth into its rhizomes. You can see there's actually 4 that are starting to pop up out the surface. Actually, there's a 5th one at the back there as well. These basically what the plant does is it sends up the new shoots. The new shoots slowly mature over summer. It doesn't put any new shoots up until next spring, but it puts a lot of energy into rhizomes, stores all that energy, and it uses that energy to be able to grow incredibly fast in spring. And that's how bamboo can grow up to 1 meter a year for certain types of bamboo. But as you can see, there's several rhizomes coming. The root system is getting established. There's a lot of rhizomes underground actually spiraling around. So if I very carefully pick this up, you should be able to see there are several rhizomes starting to grow. They're going to spread, continue to grow all winter. The roots will probably fill in a bit more because this is recently repotted, so it's not fully rooted yet. But you can see there's lots of rhizomes growing. They'll continue, and although last year I only put up 2 or 3 shoots, only 2 of those shoots actually survived because basically it didn't have the energy to support 3. I was quite surprised how big these actually grew, considering the original stem was only 1 foot tall and these are now 6 foot tall, so it's probably about 5 or 6 times the size it was last year. Next year it will probably put up 4 or 5 new canes, and if bamboo is really happy it can double in height every year, so the new canes next year could get up to 12 foot, after that 24 foot. It won't get much taller than that in my climate, but I'll just see how it does. But I'm really happy with how this is done. It's getting a nice colouring on the stems already. What the Spectabilis variety has is it has red stems when they first come up, especially when the sun shines on them. They go quite a red colour. It then starts to fade and you get this bright yellow colour with a green stripe. You can see it just starting to appear on this section here. So you can just about see at the back of that one there. It's not very vivid at the moment. It should become more vivid as the plant gets bigger, but it's just got those lovely stripes. And it's also got nice variegated foliage as well. So you can see, for example, on this one here, there's a few kind of creamy white stripes on some of the leaves. That also gives it a bit more interest. So it's a really nice looking bamboo. It is a running type though, so when I do plant it in the garden, I'll definitely have to put in some pretty heavy duty liner just to make sure it doesn't spread and I can keep it contained. So my other 2 plants here are my Moso bamboo, also known as Phyllostachys edulis. This is actually a giant timber bamboo, and in the wild it can get up to about 30 meters tall. Now in the UK, especially Scotland, this is going to really struggle because it likes a more subtropical climate. Although it can handle the frost in my area, it really needs a warmer climate to grow in. So out of all the bamboos, these 2 have actually been growing in the conservatory all summer to try and get them to a decent size. If I put them out in the garden before they're a good size, there's a real risk they'll suffer from the cool, cloudy conditions we have here in Scotland, and they'll just always stay as small plants. But if I can get them to a decent sized plant and then plant them, there's more chance of survival and there's more chance that they'll get going and become giant timber bamboos one day. So in the previous updates, this one was always the smaller out of the 2 plants. It's always had slightly wider leaves though. You can see the leaves are much bigger than the one on the left. And it's always been a little bit healthier as well. The one on the left, although it was faster growing at the beginning, it was actually the first to germinate. It was always 2 or 3 weeks ahead because it germinated first. This one has actually caught up because its growth has been so much better. And the one on the left, it's often had an issue where some of the leaves kind of go a light yellow colour. It seems to have a bit of iron deficiency over its life. It's kind of getting out of that now. The new growth is looking quite good. But they're definitely growing quite different ways. The one on the right has got loads of shoots, probably about 30 or so shoots. They're all quite juvenile style, and what I mean by that is they just have a single stem. They don't have any branches on them. It's only just recently started to put a few branches on. You can see, for example, this most recent shoot at the back, it's just starting to grow a few small branches, but again, they're very small. It's just really growing single stems, much like a juvenile type of bamboo would, and it's still very much in the juvenile phase. But despite that, it's growing very well, very bushy. But the stems aren't getting that tall, and it's very much in a juvenile stage with the single stems. Whereas the other bamboo here, especially the stem here, you can see it's much more like a mature bamboo, where it's got a single stem coming up and then it's got quite long branches coming off either side. And these new shoots as well have really just come up, but they're already starting to branch quite nicely. You can see there we've got a few side branches starting to form. So that one's starting to become into a much mature phase faster, and also this has got what looks like runners starting to appear, whereas the other one hasn't got any runners. It's growing like a clumping bamboo at the moment. Generally, Moso bamboo grows a bit like a clumper in cool climates, or at the beginning of its life. It doesn't start running till later on. But I noticed with this bamboo here, the one that's been growing a bit more like a mature type of bamboo, it's got a couple of new shoots, and these two new shoots, unlike the other shoots that have come up, instead of growing at an angle and then straightening as they get older, these have actually been coming up and kind of curving back into the ground as they get older. So these look like runners that have just kind of hit the side and started to grow up. So because this is growing runners, what it's going to be doing is put all its energy into its roots and its runners, basically storing its energy up. And come next spring, I actually think this one might grow faster and taller than the other one. The one on the right here is more likely to stay in the juvenile phase. It'll grow lots of stems, but they'll stay quite low. The one on the left, because it's starting to store a lot of energy in the runners, it will probably actually go into a more mature phase and it'll grow much taller. It might only grow about 3 or 4 stems next year, but it will probably grow up to about 6 foot or so. Whereas on the right, unless it suddenly starts growing runners and goes to a more mature stage, it's going to send up just about 20 or 30 new shoots, but they'll stay quite low. So it'll be interesting to see how these do. I'm going to keep them in the conservatory for another month or so, and then I'll need to give them a winter period. It's a bit dark in my conservatory to keep them warm. They can be cold with low light conditions and go into a dormant phase like they would in winter, but if I keep them growing, they really need great light conditions to keep going. So because I don't have enough grow lights to keep these growing over winter in my conservatory, and because these are a subtropical or on the edge of temperate species, they do need a winter resting period. So I'm going to be putting these outside in the greenhouse where it's sheltered from the worst of the wind and also from the worst of the cold. And they'll be going out there sometime around September time when it's ready for them to go dormant, and hopefully we won't get too much damage over winter, and then we'll see how they grow in spring. Now when it comes to repotting, the one on the left isn't too bad, but this one on the right is really starting to need repotting soon. Even though I actually put these in some really quite large pots just recently, they've just grown so quickly the last few weeks. So I'll probably get this one in the ground if I can next year, and we'll see how this one on the left does, but that also might need to go in the ground soon. So finally, I'd like to talk about these two bamboo plants. I've not really mentioned them a huge amount in the past. I did make a series of videos probably about 5 years ago, and I basically grew these from seed. I had 5 or 6 different seedlings. A few of them died and these two survived. So these have always grown quite slow. The original parent plants these came from looked like a Fargesia type of bamboo. They were clumping, quite narrow stems, and only grew to about 2.5 to 3 meters in height. So not huge bamboos, and they're really congested with loads of stems. Not really the kind of bamboo that I like. I like large bamboo with thick canes and plenty of spacing between the canes. And although I don't like them particularly, they are good at creating a screen. And if you want to create a hedge, these type of bamboo are actually really good for that. So these have been growing quite differently more recently. When they were younger, they were growing very similar, but they've really started to show a difference now. So this one on the right, you can see, is growing much taller now than the one on the left. It's also a lot more sparse with its canes. It's still very congested, but this is actually more sparse than the other one. And the bamboo canes, when they mature, they get really quite a dark colour. You can see the new ones coming through are green there, but some of these older ones are going dark. This will be a dark cane bamboo variety. And the leaves are also slightly larger on this, but leaves aren't actually too different. It's mainly the canes. These are taller canes, slightly more sparse. and they've got a nice dark colour. Whereas this one here is much denser. You can see there it's just an absolute thicket of stems, and even the oldest canes are remaining green. There's not really any that are going dark, so as this matures it'll probably continue with those green canes. The other difference is the root system on this one is virtually non-existent. We potted that a while ago and it's barely grown any roots. It's got a very weak root system. Whereas this other bamboo seems to have a much stronger root system. You can see there's quite a few more roots. It's not a huge difference between the two of them. Neither of them have a particularly strong root system, but there's definitely differences between the two. So as they grow, they'll continue to show more differences. And what I've also noticed with this bamboo cane is when these two plants were growing, they were constantly putting out lots of new shoots. Every new shoot was just as thin as the last one. Unlike my Moso bamboo, which every new shoot tends to be thicker than the last, these were much thinner and they just stayed thin the whole time. Even the newer ones were thin. What's happened this year though is for the first time this one has started to thicken up. You can see some of these new canes are probably about 4 or 5 times thicker than the old ones. Still extremely thin, but they're thickening up and getting taller. So this one looks like it's going to have thicker canes, taller canes eventually. The one on the left is still very small, but I do expect that to grow a bit thicker with time. The parent plants, the canes were probably about as thick as a pencil or something. They were quite thin, but they did grow 2 to 3 meters in height, so I suspect both of these should get to about that height eventually. But it's interesting to see the differences, and I feel like this one might be a taller plant eventually, just with how it's already starting to size up. So that's all for now for my bamboo update. Now we're just coming towards the end of summer now, so the bamboos are going to stop growing and slow down. Any growth they do put on will just be underground, just kind of storing energy for next spring. So I probably won't have another update until springtime. It'll be quite exciting at spring though, because that's the most exciting time with bamboo. They grow most of the summer, putting out leaves and putting the rhizome growth underground. You don't see much happening, and then come spring all the new shoots come up, and then you get to see within just 2 or 3 weeks how tall your new shoots are going to be and how many you'll have. So it'll be quite interesting to see how that does. Now with the Moso bamboo, it should start sprouting only in springtime. At the moment it's still in the juvenile phase, so it's basically sprouting every few weeks. It's sending up new shoots. It should start to slow down. It should then stop once it gets to a mature phase and only sprout in spring. But at the moment certainly it's still in the immature stage, and so it's putting out lots of shoots all the time. But I would expect that would slow down as we come into winter. So that's all for this update, and I'll see you guys sometime in spring.